All right, good morning, everyone. My name is Wesley Stefanik, and I am the Chief Executive Officer of the Delaware Association of Realtors. Thank you, everyone, for joining us today for our Spring Appraiser panel. I'll be turning it over to the moderation of this panel quickly over to Phil McGinnis, but I do want to cover some housekeeping items. Please note that this session is being recorded, and it will be available in the DAR video library, which is located at delawarerealtor.com shortly after this program. Also note that we will be having a fall panel, and that is already scheduled for September 12th. So take note of that. If you have any questions throughout the presentation, please include them in the chat box. The chat function is limited though, so please send your questions directly to Phil in the chat or myself. We also received a variety of questions before the session, and the panelists do have those, and we'll be able to discuss those as we begin. So with that, I turn the session now over to Phil McGinnis of McGinnis Commercial Real Estate Company. Thank you, Phil.
Hey, good morning, everybody. Thank you all for joining us. We've got a distinguished panel today. I don't think I need to introduce myself. I think most people know who I am. I am a certified appraiser and have a bunch of other certifications for real estate. That's, I guess, for being in the business 42 years, you gather these things up. But let me introduce to you, please, first, Steve Houston from Sussex County. Steve is a state certified residential real estate appraiser in both Delaware and Maryland since 1991, holds the SRA designation of the Appraisal Institute. That's a residential designation. Steve was appointed and served 6 years on the Delaware Council for Real Estate Appraisers. You were fortunate to be paroled from that, eh, Steve?
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Pardon me, the Delaware Council for Real Estate Appraisers is the state regulatory board for real estate appraisers in Delaware. Steve is also an active real estate agent with Callaway, Farnell and Moore and Seaford, and has served on the board of directors and MLS committee for Sussex County Association of Realtors. Lynne Baker from Kent County. Lynne has been in the appraisal and real estate industry for 35 years. He has been a certified residential appraiser since licensing laws first went into effect, and is owned and operated Baker Appraisal Services, Inc. since that time. He has served as the chairperson for the county. Steve, you chaired it too, didn't you?
Yes.
Yeah, I did. I don't know. I did 5 or 6 years as chair. But Lynn was served on the council, appraiser council as well, and is a founding member of the Delaware Association of Appraisers. Lynn's also an associate broker with RE/MAX Horizons and a member of the RE/MAX Hall of Fame. Jim Mullen from Newcastle County has been an independent fee appraiser for more than 33 years and is a certified residential appraiser in Maryland, Delaware, and Pennsylvania. He also has the SRA Senior Residential Appraiser designation with the Appraisal Institute since 1996, and has served as the Treasurer, Secretary, and President of the Delaware chapter of the Appraisal Institute. Jim has numerous memberships in Newcastle County Board of Realtors, Cecil County Board of Realtors, Bright MLS, and was on the Cecil County Board of County Commissioners. Jim is a waterman, a board member of the Eastern Shore Land Conservancy. And so now that you know a little bit about us, let's break in. I think the first question we're going to talk about today is probably one of the top issues, not only in real estate appraising, real estate brokering, but generally speaking. Well, let's talk about not only the new Fannie guidelines, but let's talk about, generally speaking, bias in real estate appraising. And why don't we start with Steve, and then we can go to Lynn and Jim, and we'll mix them up on who gets to go first as we go through.
I personally have never had a chance to review an appraisal or been made aware of a situation in Sussex County where any appraiser has been accused of any sort of bias. I've never reviewed an appraisal. With our education classes, this is pretty much a new topic. A lot of this sort of thing is addressed in early education programs, your beginning appraisal courses, as to, I guess, the most important thing, being extremely objective. The same applies to real estate brokerage practices as far as the terminology we use in describing neighborhoods. Of course, we never describe anything as far as racial composition, socioeconomic verbiage, that sort of thing. It's important to keep everything as objective as possible. And like I say, it's a topic that's discussed early on, but as far as the new hot topic, the inherent bias versus it's something, like I say, I've never had an experience with Sussex County. I've never seen any reports that have been accused of being biased. So it's a very new topic, and we're beginning to discuss it a lot through the Appraisal Institute and of course NAR as well. So that's been about my extent with it so far.
Okay, Lynn?
I would agree with Steve. I don't think our area exhibits much racial bias. The bulk of that, I personally believe, is in the cities nationwide, in the more urban areas. I've been reviewing appraisals also for quite some time, and I have not run into a situation where things were either slanted one way or the other due to racial situation. I think we do have neighborhoods that have predominantly higher and lower values, and that may in fact have some relation to the socioeconomic makeup of the neighborhood, but it really shouldn't and doesn't have anything to do with race. I just don't think we see that much of it in Delaware. I think it's more in your major urban areas. The government has just recently come out with something called the Action Plan to Advance Appraisal and Valuation Equity. They've basically done a study that shows that nationally there has been bias, and they're trying to make changes and implement a new plan, basically.
Jim, you're probably the more urban appraiser of the group.
Personally, professionally, I've not experienced any bias, intentional or unintentional, but for the group and discussion this morning, I had just taken a USPAP seminar back in February, and Steve was a participant. So for just a few minutes, I'd like to just share some of the notes that we took. The instructor was a reviewer with the IRS, and the whole morning was dedicated toward bias, intentional and unintentional. So I was not really, or any of us, in terms of unintentional bias. So I could just share a couple notes with you folks. I think it's good moving forward. So basically, the advisory opinion from Uniform Standards of the Appraisal, Uniform Standards Professional Appraisal Practice explored appraisers and should consider when seeking to comply with current fair housing laws. So even though we're an appraiser, we still have to follow those guidelines. The other thing that's important that's defined in USPAP is an appraiser should be independent, impartial, and objective. And we have to be an advocate for our own work and our own appraisal, not an advocate for the client, the property owner of any kind. This is key that I pulled out of this discussion in the morning. It was really robust, was with regard to conduct. It's these unsupported conclusions that we really need to be aware of. And where am I going with that? And that relates to characteristics such as race, color, religion, national origin, gender. And what it talks about is these unsupported conclusions. And basically, let me just turn my book here, would be some terms that are used, and you just got to be able to explain these. These are terms like high, low, good, bad, rapid, slow. If you've ever seen that in an appraisal report, there should be some text that goes along with that. Tell me why an area is average. Tell me why it's good. Just don't put it in there. And so that's important because you have to explain to the reader of the report how you got there and why. The other thing is the actions of the participants in the market that you're appraising in. Again, this relies back on the agents and the brokers. First thing an appraiser needs to do is ask, okay, who are your market participants? Who looked at this property and why? And so that's important as well. So I just share that with you moving forward. And then I just pulled out, to Lynn's point earlier with Fannie Mae, they took a closer look at the divergent appraisal values for Black and white borrowers and refinancing their homes. And they analyzed 1.8 million appraisals as part of the refinance applications. So the frequency of undervaluation did not have a noticeable racial pattern to it, but there were 6 states, Georgia, Louisiana, South Carolina, North Carolina, Mississippi, and Alabama accounted for nearly 50% of the overvalued homes of white owners in majority Black neighborhoods. So that's something to pay attention to moving forward. And I think that, in my opinion, would go back to some of these key points that I discussed, in terms of market participants and reasoning of how we got there and why.
Well, Jim, you don't do any brokerage, correct?
No, sir.
No, and obviously our audience are brokers for the most part, members of the National Association of Realtors. Steve and Lynn do brokerage, so they have a fair amount of training in fair housing and that kind of stuff. So my guess is that those guys naturally avoid, or I shouldn't say avoid, but are aware of biasing sort of issues where you as a non-broker may not be.
Well, I think in terms of, if I were to see an appraisal and I saw these terms, high, low, good, bad, and I don't have any text to tell me why, what's the problem? Is there's no shopping close by, or is there's not a bus stop or a playground? You've got to tell us why, meaning our peers with regard to some of these terms. And, the individual that taught this seminar we just took, again, he's a reviewer with the IRS. He made it pretty clear that, when he's reviewing, he's on the lookout for some of this stuff, So I think it kind of, at the end of the day, it'll make you sit up straight. And then with that, I just also, Fannie Mae, the Appraisal Institute, and the Appraisal Foundation are all collaboratively looking at this issue of bias. And I just want to bring up one topic that I wasn't aware of, is this unsupported or unintentional bias.
Right.
Unintentional bias, though, I thought was important, was it comes in many forms, but you're personally, an example was given, you personally don't like a bi-level or split level home. And you've heard from 2 or 3 real estate agents that split level style homes are always less marketable than 2-story homes. So, again, the unintentional bias is also something you have to be aware of. You don't insert your personal opinion. That's where you remain independent, impartial, and objective.
Right, that's interesting because NAR has done a great deal of work in trying to educate its members on the unintentional bias issue, things that you don't notice that you do, and mostly that's for brokerage. But I think that's a good point. And as a follow-up, is it considered bias if a subject property within a community is slightly older than other recently sold? Wait a minute, somebody chatted again, move my screen here. Okay, slightly older than other recently sold properties, or to not be equitable in value for comps of recently sold properties within the same community. So I guess that goes, to your question about whether split levels are as marketable as 2 stories. Are we seeing that with older properties versus newer construction? Anybody?
I think it's always important. I think it's always important. I mean, obviously, it's the old real estate saying, location, location, location. Whenever we're appraising a property, we're going to look at everything in the subdivision or the immediate neighborhood first to see what the most recent sales have been. And then to me, it's always a matter of comparing apples to apples. I don't like to compare a 20-year-old house to new construction. It's not the same thing. If we don't have, so once we solve the location issue, it's about matching the houses physically as close as possible. Actual and effective age are a big factor. I like to have houses as close in age as possible. Is it okay to use a 4 or 5-year-old house versus new construction? I think that's okay if you're making proper adjustments. But to me, that's probably the extent of it. I don't like to use, when it comes to older houses, like I say, it's important to match them up as far as age as best as possible, and then make adjustments for renovations or updates if there have been any. So, like I say, it's a matter of trying to compare apples to apples as best as available, rather than apples to oranges.
Right.
I just had a similar situation, which I actually called Steve for professional advice on. I had a new home being built. I couldn't, in a community where you just bought the lot, there was no builder tie-in. I couldn't find any new sales. And I had some sales that were like 20 years old. But when I went into the Bright MLS and I looked at the photographs, they all had everything was kind of modernized and updated to today's standards. So I couldn't support making some type of age adjustment because it was judgmental and it wouldn't lead to a credible result. So I didn't do that. But in the report, I explained why. And fingers crossed, I haven't heard anything back yet. So.
And I would agree with Jim on that one. A lot of people are totally renovating older homes or homes that are, let's say, 25, 30 years old, and making their effective age, not new, but say 5 years old, because they're doing everything. And I think it's perfectly fine to compare that age home with a much newer home, as long as they've renovated everything, replaced the roof, the windows, the whole shooting match. And we see that a lot in the market today.
Okay, and just one more question on this bias thing, and we'll move on. But for you guys that review appraisals, how could you identify bias in reports that you review?
Well, I think going back to a couple of Jim's comments, a lot of it comes down to wording and non-substantiated comments about particular neighborhoods that you may see, those buzzwords, good, bad, ugly, whatever, and then not being explained as to why it's not a good neighborhood. I don't think any of us on this panel use that wordage, but like I said previously, I run into situations where the predominant value is lower, and you just have to explain why it's lower than another particular neighborhood. Because some neighborhoods obviously are better than others. We all know that.
See, better than others. How?
That's right. How? You have to explain how, because they're closer to schools, churches, shopping, etc. And the other one may be, 5-10 miles away from that. It's generally the nearby residential linkages that make that neighborhood better, but we don't use the word better.
Well, some neighborhoods have more transactions than others. Some you can identify higher sale prices, you know, I mean, there's a bunch of reasons that make neighborhoods better.
Exactly.
But just saying a better neighborhood falls right into that trap. So,
Yes.
Steve, how about you?
You know, the thing I had a chance to review an appraisal recently, and the thing I saw was the exact opposite. I felt that the other appraiser had actually pushed the value in his appraisal. He used a waterfront comparable versus a non-waterfront property, when there were more than adequate amount of comparable properties available right within the subject neighborhood. So, you know, it doesn't always work in one direction. We see it work in the other direction too, many times when somebody is pushing a value that's really not there. So it's like I say, you know, it goes back to comparing apples to apples. When you're using a property that's a lot better in a better neighborhood than your subject property, and you have more than reasonable substitutes to use, that you need to be aware of that as well. That you're not overvaluing a property as opposed to undervaluing a property, especially when there are plenty of reasonable alternatives. So it can work in the opposite direction as well.
Okay, beautiful. All right, so moving on off the bias issue, here's a question concerning finishing basements. And I guess to sum the question up, the belief is that finished basements are added as living square footage and assessments. And so people finish basements, there might be 2 bedrooms above grade and 1 bedroom in a finished basement. So the house is advertised as 3-bedroom house, and the finished square footage of the basement gets added to the living area. But they're assessed as well, including that space. So let's talk about, and then I guess the question does go on to say, when people find out that basement space doesn't count as square foot living area, would that sort of motivate people not to get a permit when they finish their basement? So let's talk about finished space in the basement and how we value those and how we count rooms and so forth. And go ahead, Jim, why don't you go first this time? You're in the other corner.
Thank you. Well, let's see. So we've all seen that, especially in the Newcastle County property record card, probably Kent, Sussex too, is that finished basement is included in the overall square footage or gross living area of the subject. So we extract that out at the finished area to give us the net above grade, right? And then what happens is then when you do your sales comparison approach, you know, finished basement versus non-finished basement, right? There's an adjustment there, but you have to be able to extract that adjustment from, it wouldn't be $1 for $1 like you would for the above grade square footage, but you recognize it. And then you would take into consideration, Phil, to your point, do I have a full bath down there or a half bath? Or do I have a bedroom, kitchenette? So that's something I just wanted to say. We took another seminar yesterday on accessory dwelling units, and there were 2 Newcastle County assessors that were in that seminar, and it was really good. So they explained that when they go out to assess a home, that they actually do include that in the square footage, which I found kind of interesting. So we had a good debate on that one too.
So this can also serve as sort of a marketing vehicle for you guys, because when we find houses that are assessed $1 for $1 in the basement, there could be an assessment appeal going on there, right?
Possibility exists.
So make sure you write down everybody's name and contact information, you audience members, And we'll form a little bit of a revolution here on this basement area taxation issue. Steve, go ahead.
Well, I was going to say with the form, the Fannie Mae form that we use, we are required to measure the basement area separately and account for finished area versus non-finished area. So when we are describing the basement in the line adjustment, we're going to include the total basement area and then calculate the area of finished area versus the non-finished area, and also include a room count. So we always separate out any below grade basement area. And yeah, we adjust for that differently than the above grade, but it's very helpful for the agents when they put the information in the MLS that they, we're just for the livable area, the GLA, gross livable area, we're looking at the above grade square footage only, and should always try to include the basement area as well as a percentage of the area that's finished. That's helpful, and inspections always more helpful than, of course, our dated assessment records. But yes, we do have to break that area out separately and account for it. And also the realtors in the MLS verbiage, when we're describing the basement, it's helpful for the agents to put in what the basement actually includes. Is there a separate bedroom? Is there a separate bath, rec room, unfinished mechanical room? All that is very helpful for us when completing the appraisal.
Lynn?
Yes, I think there's always been some confusion between homeowners, real estate agents, and appraisers when it comes to this issue. As Steve was saying, as appraisers, we can only report above grade square footage. And actually, effective April 1st, we have to follow the ANSI standards, which is the American National Standards Institute for Measurement, which counts basements completely separate from above grade square footage. So when we look at a comparable and it shows 2,700 square feet, when you know it's only an 1,800 square foot house, you do have to extract that out, and it would be much more helpful for the appraisers anyway if it was separated, as Steve was saying. Homeowners always think their finished basement is square footage, and to them, and from a general standpoint, well, it is square footage. It's just not the same type of square footage. It's below grade square footage, which is adjusted at a different amount. So apples and apples would be a good thing to follow, to use Steve's metaphor, because sometimes we look at the same exact house and one house is 1,500 square feet and the other house is 2,200 square feet. And we know that that extra square footage is in the basement, but to a normal person looking at it, they don't realize that. So to all you agents, I think you really should break it out and separate it to get a more accurate picture of what we're looking at, if that makes sense.
Perfect sense. And speaking of unintentional bias, I'm sorry I'm back to it, but we do have an assessor in the audience. And so first I'll apologize for any assessor joke that resulted from my comment. But our assessor tells us we value basements at a much lower rate than above ground finished area. The computer program shows the total finished area, not how it is valued. So apparently the assessors are in fact taking into account below grade space, basement space versus above grade space. So let's see what constitutes a finished basement. I would guess what carpet, ceiling, Does it
Drywall.
have to have walls? Can it be an open space and be finished? Go ahead.
I've seen where it's kind of like we've had paneled walls, a drop ceiling, but the floor's painted, even though it's concrete. You know, and you know, there's different types of finishes, as we know. You could have the rec room and then the finished area, as my colleagues know, and I'm sure some agents know too. It's just a matter of the quality of the finish. And that's where you derive that value. What's the quality of the finish?
Okay.
I think in the older houses, you know, like the 60s and the 70s vintage houses, you would see a much different quality differential than the above grade area. Like Jim said, you know, maybe upstairs you'll have drywall. Of course, downstairs you'll, you know, in the basement, if it's finished, you'll have the acoustical ceilings with the cheaper panel walls. But with the new construction today, we're pretty much seeing the same level of finish in finished basements. You're seeing drywall, same electric, you're seeing wood floors in many cases, carpet floors, pretty much the same level of finish as the above grade area. So it's different than it used to be. But still in all, I mean, we do calculate that area differently.
And so we're guessing that Fannie and ANSI are giving us standards on how to qualify basement area as finished or unfinished. Is ceiling height an issue on this? So like, especially basements with low ceiling heights, can that still be finished basement?
From what I've read in here, it can. I printed this out, but I didn't see an issue with it. They're talking mainly about the above grade area with the ceiling heights, to your point.
Yeah, because the question is where the ceiling height is low and what are the new height requirements? So is there a height requirement?
There is on like a slope ceiling upstairs, anything under 5 feet cannot be counted. So 5 foot's the magic number. If you have a slope ceiling, you really need to start your measurement where that height reaches 5 feet and go across the room. The small knee walls, like the 2 and 3 foot knee walls, you can't count that whole room.
I think we've seen those kind of in Cape Cods, or anybody that's been in the city of Wilmington, that third floor, you know, where that pitch of the roof is like that, to Len's point. You know, I can remember trying to squirm in there to get that all the way over there. And now I don't have to worry about that.
Well, that's for above grade space. How about basement space? Is there a
I
height
didn't see any
requirement?
mention in there of that, to your point. I mean, I'll read it again.
So
but
basement
Len-
space is below grade. It doesn't matter if
Right.
it's 6 foot.
Yeah, I
ceiling or
haven't
8 foot
seen
ceiling.
any mention of a
I
height
haven't seen
requirement
anything in
in the
regard
basement.
to basement height either.
Okay, and so bi-level space that's below grade, I guess there's, as long as 4 feet of the space is above grade, it counts as,
Not any longer, not with the ANSI standards. Anything below grade, partially or fully, is considered basement. So the bi-level will not be counted the way it used to be in many cases.
so have we seen the last of the bi-level construction?
I don't think so. It's still a value for people. You know, a bi-level offers a lot. It's going to be reported differently, basically.
Right.
And that's where you
Okay.
have to have apples and apples to be able to compare it. Because if you don't have bi-levels compared to bi-levels, you might be looking at a house with the same amount of square footage, but it won't be reported that way any longer. If that makes sense.
Yeah, absolutely. And so then, when entering the finished basement in the MLS, do brokers show the below grade square foot separately? Should they?
Absolutely.
Yes.
Seen almost every, The brokers are good. Everyone I've seen pretty much in Bright MLS, they've got it in there. They'll even have a line item with the different measurements that they've put in, which has been very, very helpful. I have to tell you, because, some just say finished basement and then you don't know. And again, it's just going that extra mile, that due diligence, it goes a long way.
Right. Okay. So we have a few more questions about basements, but we should move on. Do you take buyer concessions into consideration the same way as seller concessions? Example, buyer paying seller's transfer tax. How do we treat concessions? It doesn't matter really, does whether it's buyer or seller concessions, right?
What do you think about
Typically-
that, Steve?
Typically, we consider the seller's concession. Different appraisers have different theories on the seller concession. I normally deduct the full amount of the concession from the sale, because that is money that the seller did not receive. It's not a percentage thereof. It's the, I always deduct the full amount of any selling contribution. But as far as a buyer's concession, no, that's not something we normally deal with. I don't know whether Lynn or Jim has ever had that, but typically with our Fannie Mae form, it addresses seller concessions typically.
Right. Well, that's the textbook. You
Right.
guys agree?
I'm seeing a lot of contracts with buyer concessions where they're paying all the transfer tax or paying, a variety of things. And I personally don't do anything with those buyer concessions. We only address seller concessions, as Steve was saying. Now, I don't know if that's right or wrong. What are your thoughts, Phil?
Well, I sold a house. I don't do that very frequently, but I was forced to do that, and it's going to close next week. And we had 3 offers. It's new construction, and so we got 3 offers when the construction was finished. And what the selected offer did include the buyer paying the seller's share of the transfer tax. And when we analyzed that, in terms of seller's net, then, it was actually better than having a higher price, because we didn't have to pay transfer tax on the transfer tax. And so the way I would look at it, and I probably would add I would add buyer concessions to the price, because the buyer is paying more for the property by virtue of paying the above the customary split of the transfer tax. And that's certainly the way the seller and myself analyzed the offer was, $100,000 and $2,000 in additional transfer tax. And so really the buyer paid $102,000.
And I agree with that, but Steve, does Fannie Mae allow us to make positive concessions, a positive concession adjustment as opposed to a negative?
I'm not aware. I don't know the answer to that question. This is the first time I've actually been posed it, so I don't know. We'll have to look into that.
Well, who did the equal and opposite reactions? Was that Einstein? No, I mean,
It makes sense.
theoretically, conceptually, commonsensically, if seller concessions come off the price, buyer concessions should go on the price.
That's a good one for you to look into, Phil.
Gee, thanks.
Talk to Fannie Mae about that.
So Jim, you're not running across that at all?
I haven't, just the seller concession, but some of my discussion with some of the agents is the transfer tax in Delaware is too high to begin with.
We're getting close. We're getting closer on that all the
So
time.
I don't want to dive into the political arena with it, but it's, how do we compete with our other jurisdictions around us?
Yeah, well, obviously Maryland and Delaware have less of that to worry about. But in this robust market, buyer paying transfer tax is meaningful. Okay, so let me look here while I'm looking for other questions. Can you guys provide any advice towards helping brokers do a better job on CMAs? And specifically, in terms of historic properties that are. So let's talk about CMAs, and then the question went on to historic properties, but let's call those, let's say, peculiar properties, different kinds of properties. What kind of advice do you have for brokers there?
I would say the value of substitution. If you're going to do your CMA, right, and you're subject to ranch or two-story, right, just like the paired sales analysis in appraising, value of substitution, try to pair it as close as you can. And if you can't find anything and you have to substitute something, again, just as close as you can be. And with regard to the historic end, I hear you loud and clear on that one. That is tough. But you may just have to go back in time or maybe jump over to another jurisdiction. Again, value of substitution, because those type properties are so unique. The 17th century or 18th century farmhouse on 5 acres, you know, it's tough, and I know it.
It's
Yeah.
always been hard. Many times, you know, I'll get a call once every couple of years. Somebody will inquire about, you know, the house is on the National Historic Register. What does that do? How does that add value? That's a very hard question to answer, especially in our area. I mean, as far as houses with historic appeal, most of that, in my experience in Sussex County, the premium is for maybe in-town locations in Lewis, you know, Ship Carpenter Square, some of the in-town Lewis historic districts. But there again, you know, applying a premium for a house that's on the National Historic level, it's a very hard value to ascertain or separate out. There's, you know, and it just depends on location. If you're in Georgetown in Washington, D.C., and you're in a block where the majority of the homes are on the historic register, then that's a completely different animal. But like Jim says, you know, in rural Sussex or Kent County, an old farmhouse out in the country that may have some historical appeal, it's very hard to apply a premium value for that sort of for being on the register. So you have to look at properties that are comparable in quality, size, condition, age, amenities, and location. And if you find 3 within 2 or 3 years, that's probably going to be the best that you can do. But yeah, it's the historical appeal properties are very difficult. And I would say that there's a lot of subjectivity involved with that sort of valuation.
Lynn, we have some historic properties, don't we?
Yes, I was getting ready to say, I agree with Steve and Jim on most every point there. I've had the occasion to do a fair amount of them in Dover, and we have homes dating back to the, you know, the early 1700s. And just because they're on the register, it really, you can't quantify that particular adjustment. So you try and find similar homes and you make adjustments for differences in features, condition, you know, those type items, as opposed to the fact that it's on the register. The register is more of a, let's say, a personal preference for people. Some people love older homes, and if it's on the register, that just gives them that much more appeal and allure for that house. But as appraisers, I don't think there's any way to quantify what that gives you. You are making the adjustments for condition, features, location, etc. So
Without
we
trying
run
to
into it, and we generally have enough sales to work with to produce a credible report.
Right, and so you were in Delaware, so obviously we have a lot of older houses. How about waterfront? Same sort of ideas, historic properties with waterfront properties?
Find me another sale.
Well, yeah, I guess at the end of the day, what it comes down to is we can make adjustments if we have sufficient sales data to show us what the adjustments are. Is that generally the consensus? I hope so, because I think
Yes.
I took that right out of the textbook.
I do emphasize, I mean, I have empathy for agents that get those type of properties and have gotta, work their way through it. I mean, you really earn your money there at the end of the day, because the due diligence is much more intense than, say, a home in a community where you've got a dozen sales. I mean, that uniqueness and that craftsmanship, and you don't find that in today's world. And it's up to Lynne's point and Steve, it's all up, it's well kept, and it's you put it down, you got to pick it back up.
Well, and I guess the folks that are looking for a direct statement tip comes down to this. If you have historic properties, you want comps of sales of historic properties. If you can get, 2 or 3 or 4 sales or however many that make sense, then comping historic properties to historic properties are going to give you the best indication of the value. Same thing with waterfront. And so if you're trying to comp waterfront properties to non-waterfront properties, then you got to go find the adjustment for waterfront, right? If you're comping non-historic properties to historic properties, and you got to find the adjustment for the historic property, so you need to calculate that adjustment by comparing sales.
I've never seen it. If you find it, let me know.
It is Delaware after all, so that's like comping the pool. Remember that? What's the pool worth? Well, how much does it cost to put in? Well, I don't know. I mean, I can remember back when buyers, well, we got a pool. Okay, we'll fill it in. I don't want the pool. Well, they don't want to pay for it. So, seller says it cost me $18,000 to put the pool in. And, you're given $2,000 or $3,000 for the pool because that's what the comps indicate. Sales with a pool versus sales without a pool, and everything else is the same except for the pool. And all you got to do is subtract the two values, and that tells you what the pool is worth.
And it's never worth what it costs.
And it's never worth, well, especially for a pool, never worth what it costs. So how much weight is placed on the previous sale price of a property? And that's within the last 6 or 12 months in this rapidly rising value market with low inventory. I mean, what are you seeing with the rate at which sales are occurring? And
What I've seen is you get the ones that homes are tired, and say the contractor comes in, and then all of a sudden, it's the paint, the powder, and then we do the new flooring, the kitchen, the baths. We pepper this thing up, and it's bought at X, and it's listed at Y, and it sells at Z, and it's like, holy smokes. That's when you have to go back to the agent and you just kind of talk to them to be like, again, the market participants, who came and looked at this house, how many offers? But that's what I've seen. I haven't seen too much where it was bought, and I'll defer to my other colleagues here, where it was bought and 9 months later it's sold and nothing was really done to it. I haven't come across that. Mostly it's been the flip or the contractor that's come in.
And they're making physical changes to the property before they flip it.
Oh yeah, it's got, I just want to mention this. It's got all those new modern, like this new modern flooring, vinyl plank and luxury vinyl. I mean, that stuff is durable forever, you know, and just same thing with granite kitchens and bathrooms and fixtures and LED lighting. I mean, they can do some really neat things with some of this updating.
Right, are you other guys seeing, I guess, re-entry in the marketplace in the short term?
Well, short term is a relative thing. If you want to talk 1 to 2 years, I'm seeing absolutely crazy stuff. Let's say in neighborhoods in Smyrna, for instance, relatively newer homes that may have been 230 a year and a half ago that are 330 now, you know, up 100,000. People bought them either new or 2 to 3 years old and now are making 100,000 in a year and a half. Supply and demand, there just aren't enough homes out there with the influx of out-of-state buyers and all the buyers we have in Delaware. Anytime something in a particular price range comes on the market, let's just call it 250 to 350, there's 10 buyers that want it pretty much, if it's a newer or newly remodeled home. Either way, we just need more inventory on the realtor side of things. So everybody get out there and list some properties.
Right, Steve, how about you?
I've been seeing a lot of some appreciation for properties that were bought, you know, pre-pandemic 2019, you know, where the people bought the property in 2019 and are selling now. And, you know, the number I see with a lot of properties is like a 30% increase in value over 2019. And I've seen that kind of consistent with a lot of property types. Of course, the rate of appreciation is never, you can't just apply a flat rate and say, yes, everything's increased 30% since 2019, because that's not the case depending on the type of property. Obviously, properties with premium locations, like, you know, in the beach market area within the Ocean Block or a couple blocks back, there's been different levels of appreciation based on different property types. But as far as coming inland, you know, central Sussex County, western Sussex County, you know, properties that were purchased in 2019 and are coming back on the market now, I'm consistently seeing around 30%. I don't know how accurate that is, but I've seen it more than a few times. But as far as year over year flips, like Jim was saying, I mean, you'll see a property, the flips are coming back on the market completely renovated, totally gutted, renovated, and you know they're commanding good money based on what the investor bought them. But you know, it's not like you can just buy a house and put new carpet and paint in. They're coming back with completely renovated kitchens, you know, the white granite, the white cabinets, the plank floors, you know, the gray and the white color schemes. Everything's been redone, and complete interior renovations, bathrooms, kitchens, just everything.
Right. I heard an interesting story. We're getting close to finishing, but I did hear an interesting story the other day about the multiple offers, and the agent was explaining that people were coming from out of state and just putting a deposit on a house. And in fact, actually, I teach real estate. I teach the sales licensing math, and it was one of the people in that class who bought a house, and they had found that people were coming from out of state and just putting deposits on houses to hold them while they decide which house they want. And so they might have 5 or 6 deposits on 5 or 6 different properties. then pick the one they want, and then the other ones come on the market or go back on the market or whatever. So I don't know how many people are seeing that, but to that extent, are you guys using pending sales or, things like that in your valuations or in your thought process leading toward valuations?
Try to include it, but the thing with the pending, you just don't know if it's pending at
not a sale.
450, and then you watch and see when it closes at 465 or 475, and what I try to do is, me personally, is try to give the reader of the report the flavor of the market, so they understand how you got there and why.
Yeah, what's that?
I think before things went crazy, I mean, you could consider a pending sale that had a normal marketing period, maybe a month or 2 months, and you would look at the terminal list price, and you could go ahead and assume that the property is probably going to reasonably sell, maybe 5% less than list. But you can't make that assumption now. So I think it's very dangerous to try to use a pending sale. If you look at a pending sale that's been on the market for 1 or 2 days, I mean, you can make the presumption that it's going to sell for list or well above list, and you don't know what that final number is going to be. So I would say that's, I shy away from that right now, because there's just too much unknown. What is the final value going to be? So I think it's important to look at the active listings. What's the competition? The other thing too that I've been increasingly doing is looking at what's coming to market. I think that's been very helpful to see, a property that's going to come to the market in a week or two, as opposed to an active or pending, to give you an idea as far as value. But yeah, using pendings right now, especially that we're on the market 1 or 2 days, you just don't know what that final number is going to be. So it could be very misleading.
Might not sell at all. Lynn, what's your thought?
Well, yeah, I look at pending sales all the time, and I use them in some cases. Much like Steve was saying, we don't know what the final number is going to be, but I think we can presume that it's at a minimum, if it was on the market 1 or 2 days, it's at a minimum of the list price. And I think as long as you explain that to the reader of the report, that you are using the list price, but in fact, it probably sold for more than that your bottom line number is going to be lower than the actual price. So I think you can use them if you explain how you're using them. And they can be additional support. They're never primary support, because we have to use closed sales for primary support.
Okay. We are at the top of the hour, which is our time limit. Oh, wait a minute. Mentioned we'll go to 11:15. So are you guys okay with going another couple minutes? Sure. Okay. Beautiful. So let me go back here, because there was a question. Oh, I just want to make sure that I saw something in the chat room about the pending sale and bear with me just a second. Can you highlight the impact on the data when realtors increase the price of the house when it goes pending? Also, the importance of realtors furnishing all the comps, including the ones we don't want you to see. So that is a bit of a loaded question. And I'm not aware. I mean, I guess are brokers raising the price of the property when it goes pending, or are we getting contracts above the list price?
Absolutely. I mean, I've seen it a lot where they're getting multiple offers, and the ultimate contract accepted is higher than the list price. So the broker or the agent raises the price in the multi-list. I don't know what purpose that serves, but I think it's to try and influence the appraiser to say, well, it was listed for this, when in fact, it wasn't listed for that. It went under contract for that. So, yeah, but I'm seeing prices changed all the time in Kent County.
Is that reaction to market activity, or is that an effort to shell game or hoodwink something?
Is it an effort to show what?
For shell game or hoodwinking or?
I mean, I don't think it serves any purpose, but I see it being done all the time. If a house is 300 and it sells for 315, the price is increased to 315. And I don't know if that's to fool the appraiser or what, but we have the history of the property, so it really serves no purpose.
The MLS display shows the previous list price, and I've seen that too. So it shows the previous list price is lower, and the current list price, they go back and they put it in the higher number. So we can see what the previous lower price was in the
Okay,
display.
oh, I get you now. Oh, I'm sorry, I kind of misconstrued the whole question. So you have a house listed at 300, it goes under contract for 315, so the agent goes back in and raises the price to 315 to the offered price, so that,
But
I
the
guess-
previous list price still displays.
right, okay, I got you now. Oh, right, well, that is hoodwinking and shell game. All right, Lord Almighty, okay. And so we're seeing that. Are we seeing it in our appraisals? I mean, you can see it in the multi-list, but are you working on appraisals where that event has occurred?
I've had it occur.
Okay.
I've had it occur.
Yeah,
Jim, you've
I've
been
had it
quiet
occur.
about.
Taking it all in, but I haven't really
Are you
seen it. But
shocked?
with regard to the comps, I mean, agents are always give you that nice folder with all that data in there, actives, pendings, solds. I think it helps at the end of the day with the methodology of how they arrived where they were at. But to influence the appraiser, I mean, again, it goes back to that core independent, impartial, and objective. Very appreciative of that data, but it just helps to see how they arrive there, you know? So I think the sharing aspect is welcomed, in my opinion.
Okay. So we got some other comments on the moving of the price, but I think we pretty much handled that. Let me see what else we got here. Okay, how are we reacting, I guess, or accepting, or what do we see in the future with the new hybrid desktop appraisals that are occurring? And are you getting requests for those kinds of reports, those kinds of assignments?
I think Jim has done some. I personally have not done any.
I haven't done any. The only thing I've done is just some restricted use for a local lender, just to gauge value. But I don't know. We talked about this in our USPAP seminar, and the issue here is somebody goes, looks at the property for you, brings back the data, you sign it, you do it. You know, I don't know. You should be doing your own work at the end of the day. That's my opinion. You got to see it. You got to feel it. You got to, you know, I don't know what this hybrid, I don't know what the end game here is other than to save money and time at the end of the day. But if that's the end result, you're not getting a credible result.
Pete, if nothing else, go ahead, Lynn.
So that's the hybrid report, and I agree. I don't do them at all. April 1st, or actually March 19th, they rolled out a desktop appraisal. And I'm not doing them at all either. But basically, you have to have some manner to collect the data, whether it be by homeowner with a smartphone or some other type of technological tool, and they're requiring full floor plan sketches and measurements. So you need some other type of tool to obtain that data. But Fannie Mae thinks this desktop appraisal is going to be the latest and greatest thing. And I don't personally know any appraisers that are doing them yet or plan to do them. Have you run into those yet, Steve?
No, I have
No.
not. I have not.
I haven't had a lender order one yet, but I have 8 lenders that send me email every day that they're getting ready to order them. And I'm personally not going to do them yet because I just need more information.
So if Fannie is using these, because the first thing that went through my mind was USPAP certifications on these, on our appraisal reports. And so there's got to be a different sort of certification to do these things, right?
They've got
I
some
guess
new
that complies
wordage
with
in
USPAP.
there.
Say again?
They have some new wordage in there, Phil.
That
You know,
complies
some-
with USPAP, I guess, right?
Some CYA USPAP wordage, yes.
Okay.
So, but again, back to me, it's still kind of what Jim was talking about. It closely resembles a bifurcated report where you're not there. So how accurate is the information that you're receiving back via technology? I'm not sure that's a good way to do things. But that's just my opinion. I could be wrong.
Well, it's a risk issue, and I think the risk issue is obvious. Heck, I remember I got my license in April of 1980, and I came to work in the brokerage full time in August of 81, I think. And I wasn't here but a couple of months when one of the older guys in the office, if I'm allowed to say older, without unintentional bias, but one of the more experienced guys had done this appraisal. It was an exterior only appraisal, and he got sued for it.
Wow.
Now, I mean, he issued a number, and this is way before licensing and way before regulation. This is 1982 or so. So, you know, you're back in the Pleistocene era, but he did a report, and then 6 months later he gets sued. Now, in the intervening 6 months, you look at the pictures and things, you can see the broken windows and, you know, the total devaluation due to physical deterioration. But just the same, you know, you take a lot of risk by doing limited, restricted reports. So, okay. Again, there's another question about how do you adjust for condition, and how do you make any adjustment, I guess. Did we handle that succinctly, or you guys want to take that on?
Well, two trains of thought there. You look at the physical short-lived depreciation and the physical long-lived depreciation of the home or the property. So what's your short-lived? Paint, carpet, right? Hardwood floors might need to be cleaned. What's our long-lived items? Roof, driveway might be cracked, kitchen and baths need updating, heater, hot water heater. I mean, those are the long-lived items. If they're in good shape, the long-lived items, then, you know, the short items, say paint, carpet, I mean, you can figure that out on $1 per square foot basis. That's how I approach that, is differentiate between the two. Long-lived, think roof, window, siding, kitchen and bath, short-lived, paint, carpet, flooring.
Appliances.
Cost to cure, I mean, like Jim was saying, you know, when you look at the extent of the deferred maintenance of a property versus a property that's, you know, would be considered move-in condition. You look at the sum of the deferred maintenance and estimate a cost, and try to figure out what the market reaction would be to a house in you know, that needs repairs versus a property that's move-in condition. So it's kind of like a cost to cure. What is it going to cost? You know, what's the new roof going to cost? What's, you know, well, septic system, if it's a property that needs a new septic system. I mean, it's, you look at all the sum of the total of everything that needs to be corrected, try to estimate a cost and the market reaction to it to derive your adjustment for condition.
Right. Lynn?
Yeah, and following up on what Steve just said, the cost does not equal value or adjustment. You have to basically take what the market perception of that improvement is to really come up with the number. You know, some people will say, well, I just spent 20,000 on this. Well, that doesn't mean you get 20,000 back for it. It depends on what the improvement is and what the market thinks about that improvement. Much like the swimming pool, you know, I just spent 50,000 in my backyard. The appraisal will be 50,000 higher, won't it? Well, no, it won't. But it's just one of those things. Pools are probably easier to extract than condition because, you know, if you have 2 or 3 houses in a similar neighborhood and you have pools and no pools, well, that's generally the price differential, all other things being equal, obviously.
Yeah, right. So for most adjustments, I would look for price differences in the feature I'm trying to adjust, but maybe for condition, that's not the wisest.
Just remember, all of us real estate professionals from our appraiser Bible here, that when you provide a scale, just remember, put it in proper context relative to what? And that's in quotation marks.
Right. Right. So just trying to do a lumped market derived condition adjustment may overstate or understate the actual amount of work that needs to be done.
Well, and it goes back to that other core issue. Is it unintentional bias? I don't like the color of the living room, or, you know, I wouldn't put carpet there. I'd expose the hardwood floors. Well, that's not your call. That, you know, independent, impartial, and objective.
Right. Right. All right. Well, we are at the time.
Can I share one thing from our USPAP that I wanted to bring up to everybody on here? I thought was important. Our instructor discussed this, and I think all of us can use this moving forward as real estate professionals. When we were talking about appraising in a town or a city or working there somewhere, was what's called a walk score. And I've never really heard that term before, but I think moving forward, it may become relevant when we talk about market participants. What's the walk score if I live in Wilmington, Dover, and Smyrna to shopping, bus service, work? And it's a new kind of term that started, he was explaining to us, it's kind of come on to its own. So I think those of us that work in a urban area or city or a highly developed area is something to consider moving forward, these walk scores. Am I 6 blocks or 12 blocks in terms of marketability and valuation? And I thought it was kind of cool when we talked about that. So I just share that with the group. I wrote it down. I wanted to share that walk score.
Okay. All right. So Wes, we're going to do this again in September, right?
I believe so, yeah.
Yeah, so I apologize because we had about 12 more questions or more and follow-up comments in the chat room, and time didn't allow for us to get to them. So if you're going to join us in September, please, by all means, email the questions in advance. And you know, the questions that get us started are definitely going to get answered. And the chat room, you know, as we discuss, I know it instigates your imagination and whatnot, and you know, your curiosity, but just time doesn't allow to get us to all the questions. So I apologize to those who didn't get their question answered.
Please, though, if you do have other questions in the meantime, send them to info@delawarerealtor.com. I'll start compiling them, and if there's some sort of theme we see, maybe we can put out an FAQ sheet about a particular topic if it's necessary. But with that, Phil, Steve, Lynn, Jim, thank you so much for taking the time today. Really appreciate it. A lot of good comments coming in. So thank you all for taking the time to do it. Appreciate it. And thank you for everyone who joined us for signing up and being here today. Again, email the rest of your questions, and we'll see everybody back in September for the same type of session. Thank you all.
Thank you.
All right, see y'all.
See
Have a
y'all.
good weekend.
Thanks.
Stay safe.